Hello! Did you know that the Sega Dreamcast's Race Controller supports pedals? Now, no version of this wheel was released that came with the pedals. However, some variations of it do have a socket around the back down here where you can plug in a set of external pedals. In spite of this, to my knowledge, no such pedals were ever released. However, even on my version of the wheel, where this port is blanked off with a piece of plastic, you'll find on the inside a point where the socket would have been mounted. Something like this mini DIN connector would have been a perfect fit for that. Now you'll also notice that the inside of my wheel is empty, and that's because I've recently been working on my dead zone correcting mod. I've been making up a few of those and sending them out to people, and before popping them in the post, I do of course need to make sure that they work, so I tried plugging them into my wheel. And it was during that, when I was sort of re-examining the printed circuit board that sits in the middle of this wheel, that I noticed this unpopulated area in the bottom left-hand corner with what looked to be a connector down here, and then a bunch of components that are marked fuses, resistors, and capacitors. And I thought, well, this must be where the pedals would have originally connected. So I've soldered on this, this piece of wire in an attempt to see what would happen if I plugged in a set of pedals, like these here. These are my Logitech brake and accelerator pedals that I've got for my Logitech force feedback wheel, and I've made a crude little lash up here that will allow me to plug them into this wheel and see how the Dreamcast responds to a wheel with pedals attached to it, and whether that's usable in any games. So yeah, let's crack on, let's plug this into a Dreamcast and see what that does. Okay, here's the setup. We've got the Sega Dreamcast running a copy of F355 Challenge. We've got the race controller plugged in, we've got the pedals plugged into the race controller via this cable. Let's see how this works. So, press start, and I think the place to look really is going to be in the options menu of all these games, because that should give us an idea of how they're handling these pedals. So let's go into analog calibration. Oops, A there. And you can see here we've got the analog pad, which corresponds to the racing wheel. If I move down, we've got trigger L, which is the left analog trigger, and trigger R, which is the right analog trigger. But there's no reference to pedals there, so maybe pedals work as the triggers. No, that's doing nothing. If I go back into trigger L, that's doing nothing as well. So yeah, the other analog controls are working, but these pedals are just not handled by this game. So let's try another game. This is Vanishing Point, another racing game for the Sega Dreamcast. Let's see how this performs with the wheel. Press the start button. Let's go into the options. Let's go into the options. Well, A and start aren't working. Well, it says down here, the controller has been removed or a visual memory is being recognised. Well, the controller's clearly plugged in and I can move up and down, but buttons aren't working. That's strange. Well, tell you what, let's try something. If I unplug the wheel here, plug it back in, nothing. Unplug it again. This time I'm going to unplug the pedals. Oops, make sure that's not making contact with anything. Plug that back in. Ah, now that says accept and cancel down there, and I can go into the options. How strange. Okay, so I go into the options. Let's try that again. Unplug that. Plug that back in. Plug the wheel back in. I can still... Okay, so I'm going in on there. Let's try... Oh, I can now go into the controller settings. Okay, so configuration H. Let's go down. Well, accelerated on the right paddle. Can I map that to either of the pedals? No, it's not recognising those pedals. I mean, it still thinks the controller's been removed. I can bind the right at least. Let's see. If I don't suppose if I go into the configuration, it was on configuration H before. None of these maps to the pedals. So, well, that's a bit disappointing. Let's just... Yeah, it seems to be very confused now. All the mappings have disappeared. So this is clearly not detecting the pedals either. Let's try something else. Let's try Daytona USA 2001, because if it doesn't work with that, then it's presumably not going to work with anything, surely. This is Daytona USA 2001, and the first thing that you're hit with when the game starts is this error message that the controller has been removed or a memory card is being recognised. Well, let's try unplugging and plugging the wheel back in again. That doesn't help. Let's try unplugging it, removing the pedals, and then plugging it back in again. And now the wheel has been recognised. Let's try unplugging it once again, plugging the pedals back in, and then plugging the wheel back in, and once again it has failed to be detected. And this is a good thing in a certain way, that it shows that when the pedals are plugged in, the wheel is doing something different. But what it's doing different, well, I'm not entirely sure. I've tried all of my driving games, all my racing games. I've tried Sega Rally, Sega GT, Tokyo Highway Challenge. All of these games that I've got that support the wheel do not work with the pedals plugged in. They fail to detect the wheel properly, or they just ignore the pedals. So to get a better idea of what's going on, I've dug out the 240p test suite, which has recently had an update that adds a controller tester feature, so we can see what exactly the wheel is reporting to the Dreamcast and what effect it's having, and why games might be malfunctioning when you've got the pedals plugged in. This is the 240p test suite, and I'm going to use that to perform a hardware test, more specifically a controller test. And to start with, I've disconnected the pedals from the racing wheel so we can see what a stock racing wheel sends back to the Dreamcast. And as expected, when I move the wheel left and right, these two sets of numbers down at the bottom here, they change to show the position of the wheel. Similarly, if I pull the left paddle, that changes that number up there. And if I pull the right paddle, it changes that number up there. And these pedals work independently. So let's try that again, but with the pedals attached. So unplug the wheel, plug in the pedals, plug the wheel back in. And now you will notice we've got this additional cluster of numbers down there. Now, to start with, show that the previous axes that were working, they still work as before. So again, left paddle, right paddle, and then down here, the wheel position. However, if I now press the pedals, you will see that these two sets of numbers change. So that's an extra x-axis we've got down here. If I press this right pedal rather, you'll see that these two values change, so like where there is a y-axis. And they work independently. I can press them together or individually, and they work completely independently of these paddles that were on the wheel. So yes, the Sega Race Controller does support pedals, and it does report the status of these pedals back to the console. But the problem seems to be with the software. There is no software out there, as far as I can see, that actually supports these pedals. None of the sort of mainline racing games, at any rate, seem to support it. Now, I don't know if, for example, the wheel with a socket on the back of it was released in Japan, that maybe some Japanese racing games might have some code in there to support these pedals. However, I haven't been able to try those yet. But I just thought it was quite interesting to have a look at and see that this feature of the wheel that appears to have been planned was dropped, yet with a little bit of soldering you can indeed attach some pedals to your race controller and see the values change, at least in the 240p test suite. Sadly, I don't know if you'll be able to use it with any of the commercial software, but yeah, that's all I really want to say on the matter. I just thought it was kind of interesting. Thank you for watching this video, and see you in the next one.